Welcome. Welcome as the local professor, one of the local professors for entrepreneurial finance. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome Mrs. Warrior with us here tonight. It is obviously an honor to have one of the world's most important tech leaders here at the Technical University of Munich, but it's also something very special to have one of the 100 leading women here. Mrs. Warrior has been the CTO of Motorola before becoming the CTO of Cisco. She has moved quite a lot, very obviously, but I think the real reason it's such a pleasure for me, and I'm very much looking forward to listening for you, is how a person who has been so successful and has personally been, if you look at the line of the speech today, on the fast lane herself, decides to then step sideways, having been on that list and having been given so many honors, and decide to reinvent itself and to say, now I'm going to work to change mobility, to go into a smart, fast developing startup to really change something in a different arena. I think this is something you're teaching us about life itself that is important. Mrs. Warrior is now the US CEO and as you see, for Next EV, more known as NIO, producing or having presented in November the fastest electrical vehicle there is, which of course will be very interesting for each one of you, and I guess you're talking quite a lot about that, which is also being built here in Munich, which I think we have to be proud of as Bavarians, and also partly in some kind of collaboration with a colleague of mine from the TU, and I think supported by BMW. Now, this event today is organized by the students in cooperation with DLD. We're thankful to the DLD and Steffi Czani for having organized it, and I can only extend this welcome by the words of Professor Herman, the president, with whom Mrs. Warrior and I discussed yesterday. He said he was so proud and he felt it was so important that students are organizing this event. So I'm happy to hand over to Madeleine Ox, who is handling it from the student side. Thank you.
Professor Achleitner, whoa, excuse me, for your warm welcoming words. Dear Mrs. Warrior, dear students, on the behalf of the TUM Speakersseries, I would also like to give you a warm welcome. Professor Achleitner was already so kind to introduce our guests to you. Nevertheless, I would like to give you a glimpse of how I see her. During our preparations, we did a lot of research, and we met a woman who is not only intelligent, hardworking, and self-driven, but also someone who is creative, balanced, someone who loves to cook with the family. And she's a woman, successful in an area dominated by men. So I am glad to welcome Mrs. Padmasree here on stage, a woman we all can be truly inspired by. Please join me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to our university. How do you like it here?
It looks great. I always love going to universities because I feel like I'm going to meet leaders of the future. Somebody in the audience someday is going to be leading and creating great companies. So it's very rewarding to be in universities.
And would you like to be a student again?
I'm always a student. I think I'm an engineer. I studied engineering and I work in technology. I've always had a career in the tech industry. For almost 30 years now. And I think one thing that the tech industry teaches you is that you never stop learning. The minute you stop learning, you become redundant and obsolete because technology is changing so fast. I actually moved industries. I know nothing about building cars, and now I'm leading a car company. That just shows that I have a lot to learn. So I think people that are successful are always learning in the tech industry.
Would you say that technology influenced you growing up? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in India. I grew up in the southern part of India in a very small town. And my father was a lawyer with an undergrad in chemistry, and my mom was a math major. So I think growing up, I was sort of always encouraged to be curious and find out things. And so for me, I think as a child, I don't know if I knew back then that I wanted to be an engineer, but I was always curious about how things worked. So I was interested in it, and I used to drive probably my parents crazy by doing experiments in the kitchen and around the house. Sometimes they were not very safe experiments either. And I think so that's probably drove me to choose engineering as a field of study.
All right. So until 2 years ago, almost, you worked for Cisco as a CTO. And then you decided to leave that secure position for working at a startup. Why did you do that decision?
Yeah, so I was the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for Cisco, which is a great company, great brand, and I was leading all engineering at one point in the company, and then I shifted and I was running investments. Cisco, as a company, believes that in a big company, innovation always comes from the outside. And so we were always looking for innovative startups and making investments, and part of my job was to do that. So I was always working with many different startups. I was at Cisco almost for 9 years as the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Technology and Strategy Officer. I left Cisco not because I didn't like Cisco, but I just felt like there are a couple of industries that are going to go through fundamental change driven by technology, and I wanted to sort of be at the forefront of changing an industry. Until that point in my career at Cisco, and prior to that, I was the Chief Technology Officer and Head of Engineering at Motorola, another great global company. In both companies, I participated and in some cases led how the company itself worked, right? I changed a company, but I had never changed an industry. So this time I wanted to change an industry. So I left looking for that to be my next challenge. And I think the car industry is fundamentally going to change in the next 10 years. So that's why I started this company.
I heard about a breakfast, or I read about a breakfast you had with William Lee, the founder of NextEV. Back then, what was the vision when you met, and did it change until now?
Yeah, I left Cisco September of 2015. And when I left, as I said, I was sort of like I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I didn't specifically have a job in mind. And I was really looking, most likely I would have done my own startup. I think I was looking to start something actually in the education space. And not education so much in a formal education system like a university. But one of my theses is that all of us, back to your question, we learn in schools and colleges. But once you stop working, somehow that learning process is left all the way up to you. There's no formal education that continues. And I think that's wrong. Our devices get software updates, right? But our brains really don't. When you start working, you're just expected to learn on your own. And so I was going to create a company that sort of addressed that problem. And then I met William for breakfast. He was the founder of NextEV. He had started NextEV about a year before I joined. And he mainly started the company in China. We have two companies, one in China, one in the US that I lead. And he was looking for a leader to lead the US company. And so we met for breakfast. Really, I just met because I was just curious I'm always interested in meeting smart people. And we started talking about the transportation industry, about the car industry, and a lot of things he wanted to do I felt very passionate about. Transportation was the other vertical I feel like is going to be disrupted. And so he asked me to join him in changing this, and I joined right away. And so I started with NextEV exactly a year ago. In the US, and when I started, we had 15 people. I was employee number 16. Now we have 300 people in the US. In China, we have close to 1,200 or more, and in Munich, we have 100 people. So it is a global startup. I think that's another reason why I joined. I consider myself to be a global citizen, And I think increasingly, markets and technologies really cross boundaries. And so I want to be part of a company that really takes advantage of talent and ideas from everywhere around the world.
But what exactly is your vision for the industry?
So I call it Car 3.0. If you kind of look at the auto industry, how many of you here drive a car or have driven a car? Raise your hand. Okay, pretty much everybody. And so if I asked you in the last maybe 10 or 20 years, what has been a revolutionary change in the cars that you were all exposed to? From the time you were a child and you perhaps sat in your parents' car to when you started driving. You know, can any of you think about any revolutionary change that happened in the car? As a navigation. Yeah, so it's navigation, airbags, and maybe a little bit better fuel efficiency. And by the way, navigation came from GPS, from another industry into the car. And so to me, those are very incremental improvements, right? If you look at any other product, how many of you have a smartphone? Okay, if you look at the smartphone industry, and by the way, I came from that industry, from the cell phone to the smartphone, the phones of today, the smartphones of today look nothing like the cell phones that I used to carry 5 years ago. I used to have a flip phone that was made by Motorola. Some of us had Blackberries. All those companies actually don't exist anymore, right? So if you look at the pace of change in the automotive industry, it has been very incremental. And I feel that it's going to change. And I call that Car 3.0. It's like the third generation of the product. And you know, when industries go through these changes, when digital technology becomes the foundation of that change happens much more rapidly. So I feel, you know, Car 3.0, majority of the change will come from digital side. And I say digital, which is not just software. We call it software-defined hardware. Actually, the software dictates what kind of a hardware you have to have as the foundation and how you build the hardware. And so that is profoundly going to change. So from a user perspective, what that means is the cars of the future are going to learn about you. They're going to learn what routes you're taking every day. They're going to know the traffic patterns before you know. They're going to sense objects before you can see them. And they will adjust and keep you safe at all times. 90% or 95% of accidents or traffic-related accidents today are caused by human error. And a computer will drive that number down dramatically. So when we have self-driving cars, many of the lives that are lost today in accidents will be saved. And so there's lots of profound changes we can bring. And so that's my vision, is to deliver Car 3.0 to the industry.
Okay. NIO also calls up to be the next generation car company. And you know, here in Germany, we have a big traditional car industry. What do companies like BMW or Mercedes have to change to stay competitive?
Yeah, I think, you know, I get asked this a lot, and I don't think it's one versus the other. I hope it is one plus the other. And I mean this by, I'm in Silicon Valley. My team is all in Silicon Valley, and whether it's Detroit, or Germany or Japan, I think it's always seen as Detroit versus Silicon Valley, or Germany versus Silicon Valley, or Japan versus Silicon Valley. I don't think it's that. I think, you know, there is a lot of technology and capability here in Germany. We have a team of 100 people here. There is a lot that, you know, companies that you mentioned know about building cars. At the end of the day, cars are complicated machines. Having said that, you know, I just said that the digital content is going to be much higher in the car. And so that digital content allows you to personalize the car a lot more. For the car essentially is a computer in the future. It's a robot. You know, I tell my team, we're not building a car, we're building a robot that looks like a car. But it's still an aspirational consumer product. And so there is a lot of knowledge that we can tap into from those kind of companies. And so if we can figure out how to drive a partnership between companies that are current leaders in manufacturing today's vehicle and companies like us that are coming up with new ideas, I think the beneficiary will be all of us, right? Users. You know, I think we'll have less human beings dying in car accidents or getting injured in car accidents. You know, many of us today commute for work. In the United States, 130 million people commute for more than half an hour one way. So that means 1 hour of a day, 134 million people are losing their productivity. 3.4 million people commute about 45 minutes one way. I'm one of them. I commute 45 minutes from home to work and 45 minutes back. So roughly an hour and a half of my time is lost every day. And so it's not just, by the way, time to make you work more. It's actually time that allows you to be who you are. I mean, you mentioned I like to cook with my family. If I didn't have to spend an hour and a half of my time trapped in a car, I would love to get home at a reasonable time where I can cook. So I think if we can figure out through autonomous vehicles, how to give people their time back, then you can be who the person you want to be, not a driver. I think all of us are forced to be drivers for part of our lives today, and that imposition we can remove through autonomy. So that's the, I think, value in existing car companies working with newer car companies like us.
So did I understand it right, that NIO strives to produce electric, autonomous, and smart cars? But what differs your product from, for example, let's say, Tesla?
Yeah, I think, I have a Tesla. I'm a customer of Tesla. Silicon Valley, a lot of people have Teslas. I think Tesla has done 3 things as a company. I think, first and foremost, Elon kind of brought the EV into a mainstream car. Before Tesla's EVs were considered to be these little cars that maybe were golf carts or small cars that you drove around a college campus or a community, but not really take on a highway, right? And drive at a fast speed. I bought my Tesla not necessarily because it was an EV, but it was a great car. And so I like the fact that it has great torque and it can go very fast and it's a very comfortable car. So that's the first thing I give Tesla a lot of credit for. The second thing they did is firmware over-the-air update, right? Your cell phone, your smart device gets updated constantly, but your car never does. And so that seems crazy, and there is no reason why it shouldn't. And I think Tesla started that over-the-air updates, and you can now get new features, and you can schedule when that update happens. And the third thing they did is build a relationship directly with the consumer and not have to go through a dealer system. So they're a B2C company versus a B2B company before that. Having said that, Tesla was started 10, 12 years ago, before the mobile internet was really there, before artificial intelligence really is as mature. And we are a company born today. And so, we're a company born in the digital era. So there's a lot of things we can do today that couldn't be done before. So we are all about building cars as a consumer product optimized around user pain points. So much more about personalization, much more about optimizing your preferences, where the car learns who you are. That's our focus.
Coming back to electric cars, in June, the CEO of the Linde company, it's a big gas supplier, one of the biggest actually, he was our guest here at the Audimax. And during his talk, he promoted heavily the hydrogen car. What are the advantages you see of electric vehicles over competing alternatives?
Yeah, there was a lot of research done on various alternative propulsion systems, right? For years, I think fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, and hybrid versus plug-in hybrid versus pure battery. I think it's a matter of maturity. If you look at what technology is going to be maturing faster and what is the adoption rate going to be, I feel like battery electric vehicles are a lot easier from a maintenance point of view. There's less moving parts, there's less complicated systems. It's a lot cleaner. I mean, I don't mean clean just from a clean energy point of view. It's actually a lot cleaner to build a car. It's less messy. And the price of batteries is going to come down dramatically over the next 10, 20 years because now a lot of the lithium-ion battery suppliers are putting in the capacity and scaling the technology. And there's, by the way, new kind of battery technologies also being researched at different universities. So I think I'm a big believer. It's not always that the best technology will win, but it's the technology that's simplest to productize and gets adopted that wins, right? And so we've had lots of examples of that throughout the history of many consumer products. And so I'm a big believer that EVs are here already, are becoming mainstream. And the reason that happens is usually there's a tipping point we reach where technology becomes a product and becomes adopted much faster. If you think about the first iPhone, touchscreens existed before that. But Apple was the one that actually productized it in a mobile device. And so now we take it for granted. We can't imagine not having smartphones with a touch screen. So it's not the technology, but what Apple did as a product. And so I think that's kind of what is happening in the EV space. EVs are now becoming an acceptable product, and we are figuring out ways to charge quickly. And I think as soon as fast charging becomes available, range anxiety goes away. And so range is already now 300-mile range for a reasonably priced car is out there in the market. And if we can now charge in 15 minutes to at least to get to half capacity, then you don't have range anxiety anymore. So the adoption will drive the technology as well.
You already mentioned that at the moment the price is a big disadvantage of that technology. You want to introduce, I read that, the electric vehicle in China this year, isn't it? How can the electric car business be profitable and cars affordable at the same time nowadays? Because you said...
Yeah, I think two things will happen in the car industry. I think traditionally the car industry is looked at the product as just the car, right? It's the hardware. And I have done very little to do anything beyond the car. There are no services. If you look at your smart device, yes, you buy the device, but there's lots of other sources of revenue for many players, like the App Store and the app creators, app developers. Apple actually makes quite a significant amount of revenue from their App Store. And so in the future, if you think of the car as a computer, there's many sources of revenues, including services. Some of those services can be digital services, some of them can be physical services. And so, I think there are two ways that we would counter that issue of is the cost higher for an EV. Firstly, battery costs are coming down, and I think it's estimated, many studies have shown that by 2020 there'll be a crossover. Electric cars will actually be cheaper. Or at least as a cost comparative compared to a gas car. And then you augment that with new players like us thinking ourselves more than a car company. We call ourselves more than a car company. We're focused on how do we offer additional services for you as an owner of a vehicle. And so I think that will be another source of revenue and hopefully profitability for many players in the future.
And other argument of traditional automakers against electrical vehicles is that the carbon footprint of the car is actually just as good as the energy mix you charge it with. And as I said, you're supposed to be introduced solely to the Chinese market. The energy mix there heavily relies on fossil energy sources. From an ecological perspective, does it make sense to aim for developing countries?
So it's true. I think, there's many ways we have to tackle the energy issue, the environment issue, and cars are one factor. There's other things we have to focus on. Yes, that's true. Just because we have electric cars doesn't mean we would have solved the energy crisis or the environment crisis or the climate change factors. Having said that, I think cars and light trucks do contribute a significant portion of the carbon emissions today. And the other factor that most people who are defending the old technology will not talk about is also the fact that the world is going to continue to urbanize more, meaning more and more people are going to move to cities, and there will be more and more cities around the world, and these cities are going to get crowded and congested. And so when you don't solve the electric vehicle, if you don't address electric vehicle as a solution, it's actually going to have more people buying cars, right? So part of the issue, actually I was just in New Delhi in December, and in November, New Delhi had the most polluted day in the history of anywhere in the world. November 8th, I think, was of last year. And you know, it's horrible. I mean, schools were closed down. Children could not leave their homes to play outside. And this typically happens in cities like Beijing and Shanghai. And so it is an issue of, you know, everything. Yes, we have to address holistically everything around climate change, and EVs are not the only solution, but they're a big part of the solution. We cannot ignore that.
Okay. Beforehand, you asked us who already drove a car, and you promote the ownership of a car, but trends point more towards car sharing solution. So why do you want people to buy a car instead of using car sharing?
So I don't think it's either or. Actually, there is data that says in San Francisco, there were new vehicle registration went up in the last 2 years, contrary to what people thought. You know, San Francisco is the most popular city for Uber users, and people are still buying cars, increased to buy cars in the last 2 years. So just because we have Airbnb and hotels doesn't mean we don't buy homes. We live in homes. And so just because you have something as a convenience that's on demand, it doesn't mean you won't own things. As I said, more and more people that used to ride bicycles in China are now buying cars because they can afford it. I think fundamentally people equate mobility with freedom. I think many people, and you know, when you graduate, many people around the world, and actually I would be curious to see, with the first paycheck, most people buy either a motorcycle or a car, even before they buy a house. And so why is that? You know, I think it is because we feel like it empowers us, it gives us freedom. By the way, as I said, I just came from India, and I was talking to an automotive executive in India, and they were saying in India more women buy electric vehicles because when they have an electric vehicle, they don't have to ask their husbands for gas money. It's sort of amusing, and you know, part of me, the feminist in me, revolted at that idea. But in a way, it is also a fact that people think of it as an empowerment, right? In Saudi Arabia and countries like that, you know, autonomous vehicles where women are not allowed to drive, allow them to drive in a way, be in a car that takes them. So there's maybe many reasons why people will adopt this. And so, yes, ride sharing will be there, but I don't think it'll completely displace ownership. Perhaps people, instead of, at least in the US, many families today own 3 cars perhaps, or 4 cars, and that number may come down. I think it's more than rideshare, it's on demand. I think if we can provide that convenience of, you know, hey, I have a 4-seater car, but I have friends coming, and now I need a 7-seater vehicle. How can I get that on demand? You know, so those are the kinds of things we can make it much easier in the future. I believe cars are very aspirational products. I think in the US, again, all of my data is from the US or China or India, 30% of people's house, on an average, people spend 30% of their household income on a car. And why did they do that? And I think because it's such an aspirational product. And in China, it's like 100%. In India, it's 100 to 150%. And so people always aspire to own something that gives them mobility, that empowers them to go where they want to go. And I don't think that feeling will come down. You don't get that feeling just because you're getting in an Uber car going from point A to point B. I'm not saying that ride sharing won't exist, but subways and taxis and buses always existed. The inconvenience with that was they were not flexible. You were bound by the schedule of the subway system or the train system, and Uber took that away, right? Now I can just get a car whenever, or Lyft. Whenever I want a car, I can get a car. So for that reason, I think it's growing, not necessarily because people hate cars. And by the way, we did some research and talked to people and asked people, do you like the car? Do you like your car? Most people actually like their cars, you know, and this goes back to why current auto manufacturers shouldn't give up hope. I think people, by and large, love their BMWs and Mercedes. What they don't like is what the car does for them or doesn't do for them, or what they're doing in the car, meaning people feel like they're trapped in their car. I'm stuck in my car for 2 hours commuting in traffic, and I hate that experience because I can't be productive. Why can't car? One person we interviewed said, my car is allergic to my smartphone. Why can't car manufacturers figure this out? I am driving, I'm looking at this screen, I'm trying to keep my eyes on the road, I'm looking at the center console. It's like a Bermuda Triangle of distraction. So these are the kind of things we have to do to make people want to buy cars.
One last question before I'd like to hand over to my fellow students. You talked a lot about autonomous cars, and there's still a lot of legal, ethical, and technical issues with that. For example, last year, a Tesla driver died in autopilot mode. So how can those problems be solved, and how do you want to solve them?
Yeah, so I think nobody's figured out autonomous cars. So I think somebody was asking me earlier, are the current German manufacturers behind? And I would argue nobody's really ahead. I think everyone's figuring this out. Having said that, I think you have to work on the technology. And I think that, as I said before, when technology advances, especially in the digital world, things change very rapidly. So I think there is a lot of work we have to still do in perception and planning, sensors and maps and things of this sort, but there is a lot of innovation happening. On the one hand, you can say full autonomy, level 4, level 5 autonomy is very difficult. 90% of the problems are easy to solve. The last 10% is very difficult to solve. At the same time, in Silicon Valley alone, in the last year, perhaps, there are 30 different startups all of a sudden working in the car-related technology, car tech. Actually, auto tech has now become a field in Silicon Valley for VCs to fund. And so this tells me that there's lots of people that are going to be starting companies, and when that happens, we will solve problems at a much faster pace. At Consumer Electronics Show this year, that just finished CES in Las Vegas, majority of the topics were auto tech related. So it's sort of interesting. It's no longer auto shows that are showing technologies that go into cars. It's Consumer Electronics Show that's showcasing technology that's going into cars. There's a subtle but significant message in that. And so we shouldn't underestimate how quickly technology will advance. So yeah, today there is some immaturity, and that unfortunately causes some accidents. But I think the rate of progress will be quite dramatic in the next 5 years.
Great. So now it's your turn. You can either use Twitter. Please use the hashtag #WarriorSpeaks, or you can just show us your hand, and we will hand over a microphone to you. Please shortly introduce yourself before you ask a short question. All right. Are there any questions? Here, we'll start with him.
Hello, my name is Yang. I'm a Chinese student here at TUM, and I study economics. My question is, NIO is only a company of only 2 years history, and it's already producing the fastest cars in the world. Normally the product development cycle of a car company is 5 to 10 years. What makes you so fast? Only within 2 years, and the fastest car in the world, the fastest electric car.
So sorry, what's the question?
I think the question is, how did you make it to be that fast in such a short time?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we just, I think the question was relating to, we just launched our supercar in November. It's our consumer brand for next EV is called NIO, N-I-O, and the car was EP9. And we broke the record. We are now the fastest EV. We broke the record here, actually, in Germany, in Nürburgring. And we did the laps in 7 minutes and 5.12 seconds. And we built the car in 18 months, which is a super fast time to build a car. And I think this is truly the advantage startups have, right, compared to bigger companies. You can move very, very fast. And so how did we do it? We had a very focused team. And we had a distributed team between London. We developed some technology, some of the technology in the US. Our studio here in Munich participated. So it's different groups coming together, being very, very focused on the mission. And that's how we did it. We're very proud of that fact because we're an unknown startup and we now hold the record for building the fastest electric vehicle in the world.
Actually, I like that Twitter question. It says, often said, you can't be a woman and have a career. How do you balance personal life and career?
Well, don't ever believe that because that's a lie. You can absolutely do both and do very well at both. I have a family, I have a son who works. I work the whole time. You know, I took a few months off. I think you're lucky in Germany, actually, you get longer maternity leave than, or paternity leave than we do in the US. I think, you know, the important thing is not to strive for perfection. Oftentimes parents, young parents, men and women who have young children, one of the things I found when my son was young, he's now grown up, and I was working, I always felt guilty no matter what I did. And you know, I think I would go to work and I would feel guilty that I wasn't home with my baby, and I would stay home and I would feel guilty that I was missing some big meeting. And so I would work from home and then I would feel guilty that I wasn't working out. Then I would work out and wash my baby and do my work, and then I would feel guilty about something or the other. And so the fact is that a lot of times we put pressure on ourselves and feel guilty about the decisions we make. And there is no perfect decision. Some days you'll choose your work over your family, and other days you'll choose your family over your work. And so whatever decision you're making, you have to be comfortable with that decision. And it's usually not the decision that leads to stress, it's the guilt associated with the decision that causes you stress. And when you feel guilty, you feel resentment to others, right? If you have to miss a soccer game your kid is playing because you're working late for a particular milestone or deadline to be met, if you feel guilty about the fact that you're working late and not at the soccer game that your child is at, then that causes you to be resentful to your peers and with your boss and your work. And so these are the kinds of things that I tell my team not to do. I mean, we have 300 people now. Halloween is a big festival in the US, which is a big children's thing. You know, parents take their kids and they go trick-or-treating. And so we did a Halloween thing at work where people actually could bring their children in costumes, and we did trick-or-treating at work, and parents loved it because it's a safe environment and you get candy from everybody in the office space, and we did something fun. So I think the important thing, I actually don't like the word balance because to me balance means somehow you're striving for perfection, and there's no perfection in life. I always talk about integration. And by the way, it's not just your family and your work. There are two other aspects that are important. It's yourself and your community. And I think you have to really be aware of all four things and try to be cognizant that you're spending quality time on four things. What typically happens to young mothers or young parents is that you're either working or you're taking care of your children, so you neglect yourself, and so your health suffers, and so you gain weight, or you're not eating more healthy like you used to. So you have to pay attention to yourself and giving back to your community. And that giving back to community can be anything. This is my way of giving back to my community. I really believe in leaders of the future, so I take the time if I'm traveling to speak to students. It could be that. Your community could be your church. Your community could be doing social service, whatever it is. So I think as human beings, if you're aware of all of these four things, you can absolutely do well holistically as a leader.
Okay, thank you. It's a good advice actually also for men nowadays, because okay, are there questions? From the girl down here?
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a PhD student, and I have actually more questions. First of all, I would be interested in how much does your supercar cost? And who are your target customers? And when can we drive your cars in Germany?
Sorry, I can't hear.
So,
okay,
costs,
maybe like this,
customer,
is better?
cost, customer, and?
And when can we drive in Germany?
And when in Germany. So the cost of your car, who do you think will buy it? And when are we able to buy it here in Germany?
Okay, wow, lots of questions. So the cost of the car, we'll have different cars at different price ranges, so that's still confidential, we're not disclosing that. The first consumer product will be targeted at China market, so the first car we'll launch will be toward the end of this year. That will be for the China market specifically. And then we'll follow that with other model cars. And so at this time, all we are saying is it'll be in the premium to affordable segment, not the super luxury, super expensive. We're exploring other markets. Obviously, Europe will be the next market we will look at. Primarily with the autonomous EVs. I think our strength is really thinking through. I mean, when you think of a new company like us, we are targeting a product for the future, right? And so whenever we feel the market is ready for that. So who will buy our car, I think was your next question. We spent a lot of time researching this. Why do we even want to build a car? Why does a small company like a Silicon Valley company, are we crazy thinking about building a car? Especially why an autonomous car? Right? Are we building an autonomous car just because computer science is advanced enough, or does it really serve a purpose? The first use case we feel we as a company want to solve, this is my team in the US, is to solve the commute use case. How do we make people's commutes a joy versus a pain? So anybody who has to commute for whatever reason, hopefully will buy our car. That's our ambition.
Any questions? Over there, the blonde guy with the glasses. Okay, let's pick the next question. Him with the scarf, the nice black scarf.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Trond. I'm Economics and Business Administration students of LMU. And on Friday, there's a new president put in place in the US, and I was wondering, what do you think will his impact be on the US car industry, especially when you acknowledge that he's not really acknowledging the fact of climate change?
US car industry, I got that. Sorry, the acoustics is pretty bad. I can't hear.
It's
the president-elect's policy. So yeah, our president-elect is talking a lot about tariffs for cars built not in the US, but built somewhere else, whether it's Mexico or out of the country. I think, for us, it's wait and see. I think sometimes these trade policies, you can't look at them in a very narrow point of view. You have to look at it holistically. We are hopeful that that will happen. And, on the one hand, I think you can say, okay, we're optimistic that perhaps it'll create new kinds of jobs in the US. On the other hand, certain kinds of jobs maybe you don't want to have. I think that's also something we have to think about. And we are truly a global connected world now, so we have to go back. We cannot go, no country can go back to just being very protectionist. So at this point, I would say wait and see what happens.
Hello, hi. Hello, my name is Kirill. I study mechanical engineering at the TUM, and I had a question about the models of your cars, because I've only seen the Neo on your website, and I wondered, because you mentioned that you had various models, so how many do you have, and what are they like? And my second question was, how are you different to Tesla?
So what are the models of the car?
Yeah.
And then how are we different from Tesla, right? So again, we are not a traditional car company. So we don't think of our products as models in the sense that traditionally car manufacturers think about in the US segments, like segment C, segment D, segment E. In Europe, or actually anywhere in the world, you think of a coupe, or sedan, or SUV, or CUV. I think we are trying to think of it more from a use case perspective. who is going to be our customer, what are they going to be wanting to do in the car, therefore what does the car need to be. And so when you think about a car as a robot, like I said, what we are trying to do is bring in robotics and computer science expertise to the car industry. Then you think of the car as a product to be very different, right? You have to, our design team here in Munich is working on designing the car from the ground up to be autonomous. So what does that mean? I think when you're not driving, when nobody's driving in the car, does the car need to have some of the traditional things? Today, the car is really optimized for the driver. Everything is optimized for the driver. In the future, if you're not driving, what does it need to be optimized for? So we are looking at more products and models from that perspective, from a use case perspective, and targeting our products to address those use cases, especially with the autonomous vehicles. How are we different from Tesla? I think I answered that. Tesla was initially, when they started 12 years ago, they had to prove a lot of the battery technology, and they had to work a lot on making an electric car be equal to an internal combustion engine. I think they've done that successfully. We are trying to make the car be more like a computer. So think of it more as like a computer platform with services and personalization, where the car knows you, sees you, understands you. You can talk to your car. So a lot of these things is what we are focused on.
Okay, any questions? Yeah, just here.
Hello, my name is Samara Johnson. I actually just moved here from the US. And my question is targeted to you based on your experience and your current strategic position in the Silicon Valley and with the company and with all the technology. What do you forecast the new careers of the future to be, basically?
New
careers of the future.
Careers of the future. That's a great question, and I think a very relevant question. And I can kind of say that even now, my team in Silicon Valley, I said we have 300 people, and we're working on a fully autonomous electric vehicle. About 70% of my workforce is not from the car industry. They're all from other technology areas. They're data scientists, they're AI experts, they're user interface experts, they're operating system experts. 40% are from the auto industry. The disciplines we have range very broadly. I was actually describing earlier, it's almost like a university. It's like a mini university. I have mechanical engineers, I have low voltage electrical engineers, I have high power, high voltage electrical engineers, I have operating system people, software people that work on applications, data scientists, machine learning. So it's like multiple disciplines. And all these disciplines have to come together. So I think the careers in the future are going to be more suited to people who have these multidisciplinary exposures. So if you're an engineering student, getting some exposure in design and some exposure in product development, or if you're a designer, getting some exposure to how products are developed in engineering. If you're a business major, really understanding not just the basics of business, but also how business models can be evolved. We just talked about the ethics questions, right? When you have a self-driving car, we need a lot of philosophy majors and people that understand human ethics to weigh in and give engineers input on what to code. Does the car always keep the owner of the car safe? Should we program the car to be that? Because engineers will only program whatever we believe those are. And so we actually work with schools near our office with professors who are experts at understanding human ethics and human ethical law. So these disciplines are going to be, you have to have people that are exposed to multiple disciplines. And so the careers of the future will be in those fields that kind of merge these traditionally how we thought about engineering education to be mechanical engineers or electrical engineers or chemical engineers or materials engineers. These fields have to merge. I'm a director, I'm on the board of Cornell University. And I think one of the things Cornell is doing is actually encourage a lot more interdisciplinary credits requirement in the undergrad education. So for engineers to take sociology classes, for engineers actually to take art history classes, because art is a way of expressing how products are aesthetically pleasing to people. So it's going to be fascinating, I think, to be a student in the next 10, 15 years. I think he's had his hand up.
Let's take the guy in the gray hoodie. Is it a? Yeah, you with the glasses. No, him, just next to you. Yeah.
Why China? Why China is your focus for the first car?
China is today the largest automotive market and the largest EV market and the fastest growing market. And also probably many cities in China face the harshest environmental issues, right? You know, Beijing is very polluted. A lot of times you have to monitor air quality in Beijing before you can go out. So there's a need there. There's a human need there for a cleaner technology. And more consumers are buying vehicles. So it's a big market. And so I think when we are trying to solve the problem, you know, for us, environment and the demand for clean energy and clean energy vehicles is global. That's why we started as a global company. Having said that, we feel the problem is probably most acute in China, and that's where we decided to start.
Okay. Final question. You know, our university is also called the Entrepreneurial University. So I guess a lot of future entrepreneurs and CEOs are sitting in the audience today. What piece of advice would you give them?
So being an entrepreneur is very, very hard. You know, somebody in Silicon Valley says when you're thinking about doing a startup, go have a cold shower and come back and think whether you really want to do that startup again. Somebody else describes doing a startup as eating crushed glass. It's as painful as that. And so there's lots of analogies. And I think the biggest advice I would give you is make sure you are passionate about the mission of why you're being an entrepreneur, whether it's joining a startup. If you're joining a startup, you have to really ask yourself, do you believe in the mission of the company? Because, you know, there are a lot of barriers. You know, the difference being in a big company, and I was at both, and being at a startup. In a startup, you can move tremendously quickly. You know, you decide to do something, you can just do it. There's no bureaucracy, there's no process, nobody getting in your way to tell you what to do, not to do. But you have to be super focused, and you have to be prepared to be very, you cannot give up. You know, the first time you run out of money or your product doesn't work, the temptation would be to give up and go get another job. So I think really making sure you are very clear on the mission of what you're starting or what the company you're joining. If it's a startup, what is their mission is very, very critical. Second point, I would say, is be super focused. A startup can only do so many things. You know, in a big company, you can try many things. If it doesn't work out, you can shut it down, especially if you're a very big, profitable company. You can invest $1 billion in a project and then say, okay, tomorrow we're not interested in that moonshot. We're going to do another moonshot. We know companies in the valley that do that and get in and out of businesses. When you're a startup, you can't do that. You have to be super focused on one thing and doing that thing really well. Third advice I would give is go get the best talent. I think I mean, when we hire people, I tell my team, don't just hire people to hire people. Your bar has to be super high in who comes to work with you, because you can only have a small team. And they all have to work together. And so you can't have lots of bureaucracy and silos. So the culture is very important. So I would say those are the 3 takeaways.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sperrer, for all those interesting insights. I'm actually quite curious what of your vision will be reality in a couple of years. We have a little present for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Der ist nicht da. No. So, it's for you.
Very beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, thank you. And if any one of you now got interested into the electric car biz, it might be a good idea to join TU Fast. It's a student initiative developing and building 2 race cars every year. And one of them is actually electric and autonomous. Are you working on something like that? Yeah, and the third one is autonomous, so maybe you should hire one of those.
Yes. Do you want to move to Silicon Valley?
And they're actually also quite successful, and they're always looking for new students, regardless the course. Despite that, I would like to thank the team of Padmasree, the team of the DLD conference, our sponsors, Avantgarde and the TUM Management Alumni Club, Professor Achtleitner, the General Consul from India who is here tonight, and of course, everybody attending here. The next event is coming soon. Stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
great job.
Thank you very much. We would like